The grand old building of the Ainsworth Conservatory of Music was a palace of sound during the day. From morning until evening, the air was filled with it. The frantic scales of a beginner violinist would mix with the confident chords of a piano prodigy. The deep, warm notes of a cello would drift from one room, while the bright, sharp sound of a trumpet came from another. It was a beautiful chaos, a symphony of ambition and talent. Students, with their instrument cases and sheets of music, hurried through the marble hallways, their minds focused on becoming the next great musicians. The walls themselves seemed to hum with the energy of creation. But when the sun went down, the music stopped. The students went home, the professors left for the night, and the great halls fell into a deep, almost sacred silence. This was when his work began. He was a man who had become a part of the building itself, as familiar and unnoticed as the worn-out steps on the main staircase. For 20 years, he had been the night custodian. His name was on his work shirt, but in the world of the conservatory, he was simply the man who made things clean. While the daytime was for making music, the nighttime was for him to wipe away the evidence of that creation. The dust, the scuff marks, the forgotten coffee cups. He was a quiet man, with lines on his face that told stories of a life lived, not all of them happy. His hands were strong and capable, more used to the grip of a mop handle than the delicate keys of a piano. He moved through the empty corridors with a slow, steady pace, a solitary figure in the vast, quiet space. He rarely spoke, and the few staff members who saw him would simply give him a nod. They knew nothing about him, about the life he had before, or the silence he carried inside. That silence had a name, and its name was his wife. She had been a music teacher, and her life was full of melody. She had tried to teach him once, laughing as his clumsy fingers stumbled over simple tunes on their old piano at home. He never learned to play well, but he learned to love listening to her. Her favorite piece was Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. She said it sounded like a quiet, sad conversation with the night. When she passed away, the music in his life died with her. The piano in their small apartment was closed, and he hadn't touched it since. The silence that remained was heavy and deep. One Tuesday night, his routine took him to a part of the basement he rarely visited. It was a storage room, crowded with old desks, broken chairs, and forgotten projects. He was there to check for a water leak someone had mentioned. The air was thick with the smell of dust and old wood. As he moved a stack of old music stands, his flashlight beam fell on a shape hidden under a dusty white cloth. He pulled the cloth away, and a cloud of dust danced in the light. Underneath was a piano. It was an old upright, the kind you might find in a school classroom from a different time. Its dark wood was scarred with scratches, and a long, ugly crack ran down one side. One of its front legs was slightly shorter than the others, making it lean a little like a tired old man. It looked lonely and abandoned, waiting for its final trip to the dump. He didn't know why, but he reached out and lifted the fallboard, the cover for the keys. The keys themselves were yellowed with age, like old teeth. And there in the middle was the reason it had been discarded. The middle C key was broken. The white key was split, a piece of it chipped off completely, showing the dusty wooden lever beneath. It was a sad, final injury for a tired old instrument. He was about to close it up and continue his work when a memory hit him with such force it almost took his breath away. It was a memory of his wife, not playing, but repairing a student's keyboard. She had said, "Every instrument wants to sing, sometimes it just needs a little help." Without even thinking, he went and got his toolbox from his custodial closet. He returned to the storage room, his heart beating a little faster. He found a small piece of sandpaper, some strong wood glue, and a tiny clamp. His work-roughened hands, so used to fixing leaky faucets and loose screws, now set to work on something much more delicate. He carefully sanded the broken edges of the key, applied the glue with the tip of a small brush, and held the pieces together with the clamp. It was a slow, careful process. He wasn't a piano technician. He was just a man fixing something that was broken, trying to make something whole again. He left the clamp on for the rest of his shift, the piano standing there in the dim light like a patient in recovery. The next night he returned. He carefully removed the clamp. The repair wasn't perfect. You could still see the fine line where the key had been broken, but it was solid. It was whole. He looked at the keyboard. For the first time in years, a strange feeling stirred in his chest. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was more like a tiny flickering light in a very dark room. He pulled over an old wooden stool, its legs wobbling slightly on the uneven floor. He sat down, the silence of the basement pressing in on him. He took a deep, shaky breath. The air was still and cold. He stretched out his fingers, stiff from years of physical labor, and hovered them over the yellowed keys. He was afraid. Afraid of the sound, afraid of the memory. Afraid of breaking the silence he had gotten so used to. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he pressed down on the first note. The sound that came out was not the rich, pure tone of the grand pianos upstairs. It was thin and slightly out of tune, with a faint buzz from the old strings. But it was a sound. It was music. He placed his fingers again, his mind reaching back through the years for a melody he thought he had forgotten. He began to play the first slow, haunting notes of the Moonlight Sonata. His playing was clumsy. His timing was off. He missed a note here and there. But in the cracked, imperfect tone of the old piano and in the hesitant touch of his fingers, there was something else. There was a feeling of immense sadness, of a love that was lost, of a silence that had lasted for too long. It was raw and real, a private conversation with a ghost, happening in a dusty basement, with no one in the world to hear it. The music didn't last long. Maybe only a minute. The man's fingers, stiff and unpracticed, could not keep up with the memory of the tune. The last note he played hung in the dusty air of the storage room, and then faded away, leaving behind a silence that felt even deeper than before. He let out a long, slow breath he didn't realize he had been holding. His shoulders slumped, not from tiredness, but from the weight of the emotion that had just poured out of him. He carefully closed the cover over the piano keys, as if tucking a precious secret back into bed. He stood up, the old stool creaking in protest, and went back to his mop and bucket. The rest of his shift passed in its usual quiet rhythm, but something inside him felt different, a little less heavy. The next night he found himself drawn back to the basement room. It wasn't even a conscious decision. His feet just carried him there after he finished cleaning the main practice halls. This time, he didn't just play the Moonlight Sonata. He tried a few other simple melodies he remembered from his wife's teaching books. The piano, though still out of tune, seemed to respond with a little more warmth, as if grateful to be used again. This became his new secret routine. During his break, or after all his work was done, he would sit in that dim, lonely room and talk to the ghost of his wife through the broken keys of an old piano. Meanwhile, in a practice room 2 floors above, a young man was struggling. He was a student at the conservatory, and like all the students, he was filled with a deep love for music and a constant, nagging fear that he wasn't good enough. Tonight, he was trying to finish a composition for his class, but the notes on the page in front of him felt dead. They were technically correct, but they had no soul, no heart. He played a passage on his sleek, modern keyboard, and the sound was perfect, clean, and utterly empty. It felt like a machine had made it. Frustrated, he pushed himself away from the keyboard. His head was pounding. He decided a walk through the quiet hallways might clear his mind. It was well past midnight, and the building was supposed to be empty except for the night custodian. As he walked, he heard a faint, distant sound. He stopped, thinking he was imagining it. It was music, but it was unlike any music he heard in the practice rooms during the day. It was coming from an air vent near the floor. He knelt down, his ear close to the metal grate. The sound was thin and far away, but it was unmistakable. It was a piano, playing a simple, sad melody. The playing wasn't technically skilled. The timing was a little uneven, and the piano itself sounded old and slightly out of tune. But there was something in the way the notes were being played that made the young man's breath catch in his throat. It was full of feeling. It sounded like loneliness. It sounded like memory. It was raw and honest in a way his own perfect, soulless composition was not. He listened, completely captivated, until the music stopped. He waited for a long time, but the silence returned. His mind was racing. Who was that? It couldn't be a professor. They all played with flawless technique. It couldn't be a student because no student would be practicing in some forgotten basement room on what sounded like a terrible piano. The only other person in the building was the quiet, older janitor he sometimes passed in the hallways. The idea seemed impossible. But the music had been so real, so human. The next night, the young man found himself in the hallway again, waiting. He felt a little silly and a little like he was spying on something private. But his curiosity was too strong. He needed to hear it again. And right on time, the faint, beautiful sound drifted up through the vent once more. This time it was a different piece, just as simple, just as full of a deep, unspoken sadness. He made a decision. It was a decision he would later question many times. He pulled out his phone. He felt a sharp pang of guilt. This music felt sacred, a private moment not meant for other ears. But he also felt that this was something special, something the world needed to hear. It was a pure, unfiltered expression of emotion, the very thing he and all his classmates were struggling to find in their technically perfect playing. He didn't want to interrupt or embarrass the player. So, he decided to just record the sound. He held his phone close to the vent, the microphone pointing down. He recorded for about a minute. The audio wasn't great. You could hear the faint hum of the building's air system, and the sound was a little muffled. But the melody and the powerful feeling behind it came through clearly. Later, back in his dorm room, he listened to the recording. The guilt was still there, but so was the feeling of wonder. He opened his laptop and went to a popular video website. He didn't know what to write. He didn't want to expose the man. He didn't even know for sure it was the janitor, so he just posted the black screen with the audio. For a title, he wrote the first thing that came to his mind: The Midnight Janitor's Sonata. In the description, he simply wrote, "Heard this in my music school late at night. The most beautiful music isn't always perfect. It just has to be real." He clicked upload, and then he went to bed, thinking maybe a few of his friends might see it and find it interesting. While the young man slept, something began to happen in the wide world of the internet. The video, just a black screen with a haunting, slightly muffled piano track, started to get shared. First by a few people, then by hundreds, then by thousands. People were captivated by the story it suggested. They listened to the imperfect playing and heard not mistakes, but heartbreak. They heard a story in those notes. Comments started pouring in. "Who is this man?" one person wrote. "This sounds like someone playing their memories," said another. "I've heard famous pianists play this piece, but I've never felt it like this," commented a third. The mystery of the unseen player, the humble title, The Midnight Janitor, and the raw emotion of the music combined into something powerful. By the next morning, the video was no longer just a clip. It was a phenomenon. The world had stumbled upon a secret, and it was desperate to know more. But down in the depths of the conservatory, the janitor had no idea that his private conversation with a memory had just found an audience of millions. The young man woke up later than usual, the tiredness from his late night still clinging to him. He stretched, grabbed his phone from the bedside table, and almost dropped it. The screen was flooded with notifications, messages from friends, alerts from the video platform, and emails from people he didn't even know. His heart started to beat fast, a mix of confusion and a sudden cold fear. He opened the video website. His eyes went wide. The view count on his simple black screen video was a number he couldn't even process. It had hundreds of thousands of views, overnight. The comment section was an endless scroll of people pouring their hearts out. "Who is this man? I'm crying at my desk. This is what real music sounds like. Not perfection, but feeling. Does the school know they have a genius hiding in the basement? Please tell us more about him. What's his story?" He saw that news websites and popular blogs had already picked up the story. Headlines called it "The Mystery of the Musical Janitor" and "The Viral Sonata from the Basement." The world, it seemed, was captivated by the same raw emotion that had drawn him to the air vent. For a moment, he felt a surge of pride. He had shared something beautiful, and people had understood. But that feeling quickly melted away, replaced by a heavy, sinking feeling in his stomach. He thought of the custodian, a man who clearly sought out solitude and silence. He thought of the private, almost sacred feeling in that storage room. The man had no idea any of this was happening. He had been shared with the world without his permission. The young student felt his face grow warm with shame. What had he done? Meanwhile, the janitor began his day in his usual quiet way. He lived in a small apartment on the quiet side of the city. The morning sun came through the window, falling on the closed lid of his wife's piano, which still sat in the corner of his living room, a fine layer of dust on its surface. He made his tea, read the newspaper, and didn't think about the internet or viral videos. His world was very small and very quiet. He arrived for his evening shift at the conservatory, and he noticed a difference right away. A few people he passed in the hallway gave him longer looks than usual. He saw two students whispering and looking in his direction. He just assumed it was nothing, maybe his shirt was untucked. He went about his work, mopping the floors and emptying the trash bins, unaware that he was the subject of a worldwide conversation. His first hint that something was wrong came when the head of the conservatory, a serious man in a sharp suit, came looking for him. This had never happened before. The director usually only spoke to him during the yearly staff meeting. "Could you come to my office for a moment, please?" the director asked. His voice wasn't angry, but it was tight and formal. The janitor nodded, a knot of worry forming in his chest. He followed the director into the plush office, a room he only ever entered to clean when it was empty. He felt out of place, standing on the expensive carpet in his work shoes. The director sat behind his large wooden desk and turned his computer screen around. On it was the black screen of the viral video, the audio of the janitor's piano playing filling the quiet office. The man's heart stopped. He felt the blood drain from his face. He recognized the sound instantly. It was his playing. It was from his secret special place. "We've been getting calls all day," the director said, his voice calm but firm. "Emails from newspapers, television shows, even radio stations. They all want to know about this, about you." He paused, looking at the janitor. "Is this you? Playing the old piano in the storage room?" The janitor could only manage a small, slow nod. He felt like he had been caught doing something terribly wrong. "That piano is school property," the director continued. "And that room is not a practice room. We have a reputation to uphold, this attention. It's very disruptive." He looked at the man, whose eyes were now fixed on the floor. "I'm not going to fire you. You've been a good employee for many years, but this has to stop. No more playing the piano. Do you understand? We need this to go away." The words hit the janitor like a physical blow. No more playing. It felt like someone had just told him he had to stop breathing. The tiny flicker of light that had been lit inside him, the small comfort he had found in that dusty room, was being snuffed out. He just nodded again, unable to speak. "Good," the director said. "You can go back to your duties." The janitor walked out of the office, his feet feeling like blocks of wood. The rest of his shift passed in a blur. He felt numb. The world had found his secret, and in finding it, had taken it away from him. He avoided the basement completely that night. The thought of even going near that room was too painful. The next day, the story in the news changed. A reporter who had called the school for an update was told that the matter had been addressed internally and that the individual would no longer be using school property for personal use. The article that followed had a new headline: "Silenced. Mystery janitor banned from playing viral piano." When the people who had loved the video read this, their wonder turned to anger. They felt that the school, a place of art, had crushed a beautiful, spontaneous expression of music. The comments on the video became a flood of support for the janitor and anger towards the conservatory. "Let him play," they demanded. "Shame on the school." The story was no longer just about beautiful music. It was now about a fight between cold rules and a human heart. The young student saw this new development and felt sick. This was all his fault. His attempt to share something beautiful had gotten the man in trouble. He had stolen his music and his peace. He tried to find the janitor to apologize, but when he saw him cleaning a hallway, the man wouldn't even look at him. He just turned and walked the other way, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The music had been silenced, and the silence that remained felt heavier and sadder than ever before. The silence in the storage room was now a permanent thing. The old piano stood under its dusty cloth, untouched. The janitor kept his promise. He did not go down to the basement. He did not lift the cover. He did not play a single note. His world, which had briefly held a small, beautiful sound, was now quieter than it had ever been. He moved through the hallways like a ghost, his eyes always looking down, his movements slow and heavy. It was as if a light inside him had been turned off. He did his job, he mopped the floors until they shone, but he was just going through the motions. The heart had gone out of it. The young student felt the weight of what he had done every single day. He saw the janitor in the halls, and the man's quiet sadness was like a physical wall between them. The student tried to say hello once, but the janitor just gave a small, slow nod and walked away. It was clear he did not want to talk. The guilt ate at the student. His own music, the compositions he was supposed to be working on, felt even more empty and meaningless than before. How could he create something with feeling when he was responsible for destroying something so full of it? Meanwhile, the world outside the conservatory's walls had not forgotten. The story of the silenced janitor had taken on a life of its own. People were not happy that the music had been stopped. The video of the piano piece was still being shared, but now with angry captions. "This is why we can't have nice things," one person wrote. "A big institution crushing a little bit of beauty," wrote another. The director of the conservatory started to feel the pressure. It was one thing to have a little bit of positive attention. It was another thing to have your school's name dragged through the mud on the internet and in the local newspaper. Donors, the people who gave money to keep the school running, began to send emails. They were not angry about the janitor playing the piano. They were upset that the school had told him to stop. One important donor wrote, "I give you money to support the spirit of music. It seems you have forgotten what that spirit looks like. It doesn't always wear a tuxedo." The director was a practical man. He cared about the school's reputation, but he also cared about its finances. He sat in his office, reading these emails, and he started to see the situation in a new light. He had been thinking about rules and order. Now he was thinking about public relations and money. He had thought the janitor was a problem to be managed. Now he began to wonder if the janitor could be an opportunity. A few days later, he called the janitor back into his office. The man came in looking even more tired than before. He stood in the same spot on the expensive carpet, expecting to be scolded again for something he didn't understand. "This situation has developed," the director began, choosing his words carefully. "The public has taken a great interest in you." "In your music?" The janitor said nothing. He just stared at a spot on the wall behind the director's head. "The conservatory," the director continued, "is a place that celebrates art in all its forms. We may have been too hasty in our previous decision." This made the janitor look up. His eyes showed a flicker of confusion. "We have our annual gala coming up," the director said. "It is our most important event. All our biggest supporters, our most famous alumni, they will all be there. It is an evening to showcase the very best this school has to offer." He paused, letting the importance of the event hang in the air. "I would like you to be a part of it." The janitor's face was blank. He could not understand what was being said. "I am inviting you," the director said, leaning forward slightly, "to perform one piece on the main stage. You would play on our finest concert grand piano." The room was completely silent. The janitor felt the floor tilt under his feet. Perform on a stage? In front of a room full of important, wealthy people in fancy clothes? The idea was not just scary. It was impossible. It was like asking a fish to climb a tree. He was a man who cleaned floors in the dark. He was not a performer. I can't," he whispered, his voice rough from lack of use. "Think about it," the director said, his voice now much softer, more persuasive. "It would be a chance to play again, properly, on a beautiful instrument. It would show everyone that the conservatory supports artistic expression from everyone." He didn't say the next part out loud, but the janitor could feel it. It would make this bad publicity go away. The director stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. "You don't have to decide right now. Take a day or two. But please consider it. It would mean a great deal to the school." The janitor walked out of the office, his mind reeling. The offer swirled in his head like a storm. The thought of being on a stage, under bright lights, with hundreds of eyes watching him, made him feel sick to his stomach. He was a private man. His music was a private thing, a conversation between him and his wife. To do it in public felt like a betrayal of that memory. But then another thought came to him. The director had said, it would be a chance to play again. He hadn't realized how much he missed it until that moment. The feel of the keys under his fingers, the way a melody could lift a piece of the heavy sadness from his heart. He missed the connection he felt in that dusty room. That night, he went home to his quiet apartment. He walked over to his wife's piano, the one that had been silent for so many years. Slowly, he lifted the cover. The keys were dusty. He sat down on the bench. He didn't play. He just sat there, his hands resting in his lap. He thought about his wife. He tried to imagine what she would tell him to do. She had loved music so much. She believed it was meant to be shared, that it was a gift. She was never afraid to play for people. She would find his fear silly. He could almost hear her voice in his head, gentle but firm. "It's just a song. Play it for me. If other people want to listen, let them." He took a deep, shaky breath. The fear was still there, a cold, tight knot in his chest. But underneath it, something else was stirring. A tiny, stubborn spark of courage. Maybe, just maybe, he could do this. Not for the director, not for the school, but for her, and for the music that he had thought was lost forever. The days that followed were filled with a strange, quiet tension. The janitor went through his work, but his mind was somewhere else. He had told the director a simple yes, just that one word. After he said it, a part of him wanted to take it back immediately. But it was done. The news spread through the school like a quiet ripple. The students and teachers who had heard the story were buzzing with excitement and curiosity. The quiet man who cleaned the floors was going to play at the grand gala. For the janitor, the reality of what he had agreed to began to sink in. The director, now seeing him as part of the solution, gave him permission to use one of the practice rooms for a short time each evening. The first time the janitor walked into the pristine, soundproofed room, he froze. In the center of the room stood a magnificent concert grand piano. Its black surface was a mirror, reflecting the bright, clean lights above. It was the most beautiful and terrifying thing he had ever seen. He approached it slowly. This was not his old, broken friend from the basement. This was a king among instruments. He sat on the adjustable bench, his work clothes feeling shabby and out of place. He lifted the heavy cover, revealing a perfect set of white and black keys. They looked so long, so smooth, so demanding. He took a deep breath and placed a single finger on a key. He pressed it down. The note that came out was so rich, so pure, and so loud that it startled him. It filled the entire room and seemed to vibrate in his bones. On the old basement piano, he had to press hard to get a sound. On this one, the lightest touch produced a powerful tone. It felt like trying to control a wild, powerful animal after being used to a gentle old dog. He tried to play the simple melody he had composed for his wife. His fingers, used to the stiff action of the old piano, stumbled. The notes came out too loud, then too soft. He hit a wrong chord, and the sound was so jarring in the perfect room that he winced. He felt like a fraud. This was a mistake. He could not do this. He closed the piano lid and left the room, his heart pounding with fear. The next night, he forced himself to go back. He knew that if he did not face this fear, it would only get bigger. This time, he did not try to play his own song. He just played simple scales up and down, trying to get used to the touch of the keys. He tried to make friends with the instrument. It was slow, frustrating work. Every sound felt too exposed, too perfect. He missed the forgiving buzz of the old piano, the way it hid his mistakes. This piano showed everything. It was honest in a way that was cruel. The young student, who had been watching from a distance, gathered his courage one evening. He knew the janitor was practicing. He waited outside the door until he heard the music stop. He knocked softly before he could change his mind. The door opened. The janitor looked out, his face tired. I'm the one who recorded the video, the young man said, his words tumbling out quickly. "I am so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought it was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. I wanted other people to hear it too. I was selfish. I am truly sorry." He stood there, waiting for anger, for the door to be shut in his face. The janitor looked at the young man's worried face. He saw the genuine regret in his eyes. He was just a boy, really. A boy who loved music. The janitor remembered being young and in love with his wife. He remembered how music felt like the most important thing in the world. He felt his own anger and hurt soften just a little. After a long silence, the janitor nodded slowly. "It is done," he said, his voice quiet. No use talking about it now. Can I help? The young man asked, feeling a surge of hope. I could turn the pages for you. Or just listen. I know these pianos can be difficult. The janitor thought for a moment. Then he stepped aside and let the young man into the room. It was not forgiveness, not exactly, but it was a start. From that night on, a strange new routine began. The young man would sit quietly in a corner of the practice room while the janitor played. He didn't offer much advice. He just listened. His presence strangely made the janitor feel less alone. It made the big, scary piano feel a little less intimidating. Sometimes the young man would simply say, "That part was nice," or "Maybe slow down a little there." It was a simple human connection, built on a shared, though complicated, love for a melody. The janitor stopped trying to fight the grand piano. He stopped trying to be a perfect pianist. He started to think of the instrument as simply a louder, clearer voice for the same song in his heart. He went back to playing the simple tune he had written for his wife. He played it over and over, not for practice, but to remember. He played to remember the way she smiled. He played to remember the sound of her laughter. He played to remember the light in her eyes. As he did this, something changed. His fingers became more confident. The music began to flow. He wasn't just playing notes anymore. He was telling a story. The young man in the corner would often find he had tears in his eyes. He had heard world-class musicians play with incredible skill, but he had never heard anyone play with so much truth. The night before the gala, the janitor played his piece one last time in the practice room. When the final note faded, the room was silent. He looked at the young man. The young man smiled, a real, warm smile. "It's perfect," he said. "They're not ready for it." The janitor nodded. He was still terrified. The thought of the crowd, the lights, the silence was enough to make his hands shake. But he knew the music now. It was no longer just a memory. It was a part of him. He was as ready as he would ever be. Tomorrow night, he would open his heart in front of the whole world and hope that they would understand. The night of the gala arrived. The main hall of the conservatory had been transformed. It was a world of sparkling crystal, crisp white tablecloths, and the low, elegant hum of conversation. Men in black tuxedos and women in shimmering gowns moved through the room, their jewelry catching the light. This was a world of money and prestige, a world the janitor had only ever seen from the outside when he was cleaning up after it was all over. Backstage, he felt like a creature from another planet. The director had found him a simple, dark suit to wear. It felt stiff and unfamiliar on his body. He could hear the murmur of the crowd through the heavy velvet curtain, a sound like a distant ocean. His heart was beating so hard he thought it might jump out of his chest. His palms were cold and wet with sweat. He wiped them on his trousers over and over. The young student was with him, acting as a kind of helper. He saw the fear on the janitor's face. "Just breathe," the young man whispered. "Remember why you're playing. Play it for her, no one else." On the other side of the curtain, the director was at the microphone. His voice was smooth and polished. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight we have a very special performance. It is a story that reminds us that the spirit of music is not confined to concert halls or conservatories. It lives in the most unexpected places and in the most unexpected hearts. Please welcome a very special member of our conservatory family." The janitor heard his name. It sounded strange and formal. The young man gave him a small, encouraging push. The heavy velvet curtain was pulled aside. For a moment, he was frozen. The light hit him first. It was blindingly bright, shining directly into his eyes so that he could barely see the audience. But he could feel them. Hundreds of pairs of eyes watching him. The silence in the room was absolute and heavy. It was the loudest silence he had ever heard. His feet felt like blocks of wood as he walked to the center of the vast stage. There, in a single, brilliant spotlight, stood the grand piano. It looked larger and more majestic than ever. He sat on the bench, the leather creaking under him. The sea of faces in the darkness beyond the light was just a blur, but he could feel their expectation. They were waiting for the viral sensation, the mystery janitor. He placed his hands on the keys. They felt cold and smooth. He tried to remember the first note of the piece he had practiced, but his mind was a complete blank. A wave of pure panic washed over him. He was going to fail. He was going to sit here in this terrible silence and forget everything. He closed his eyes tight, and then he did the only thing he could do. He stopped thinking about the crowd. He stopped thinking about the director. He stopped thinking about the video and the news stories. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he searched for one thing. He searched for her face, and he found it. He saw her, not as she was at the end, but as she was when they were young. He saw her smiling at him from across their small living room. He saw the way the sunlight came through the window and lit up her hair. He remembered the smell of her perfume, a simple, fresh scent. He remembered the sound of her voice, humming as she cooked dinner. He remembered the feeling of her hand in his. His breathing slowed. The tight knot in his chest began to loosen. His fingers, which had been stiff with fear, relaxed. He began to play. It was not the Moonlight Sonata. It was the simple, gentle melody he had composed for her so many years ago, the one he had played in the basement. The notes were soft at first, a little hesitant, like a shy hello. But as he played, he poured every memory, every bit of love, every moment of loneliness, and every spark of hope into the music. The audience listened, completely captivated. This was not a technically perfect performance. It was something far more rare. It was a soul speaking. Then it happened. His fingers, lost in the memory, moved to a part of the melody that was a little more complex. He reached for a chord, and in his emotion, one of his fingers slipped. He pressed down on the wrong key. A single, harsh, discordant note rang out through the silent hall. It was a jarring, ugly sound that cut through the beautiful melody. The janitor's eyes flew open. The spell was broken. The real world crashed back in. He had made a mistake. In front of everyone. On the biggest night of his life, his heart sank. He felt the heat of shame rush to his face. He wanted to get up and run from the stage, but then something inside him, a strength he didn't know he had, took over. It was as if he could feel his wife there with him, giving him a gentle squeeze on his shoulder. He heard her voice in his head, not from a memory, but clear as day. So you made a mistake. Keep going. The song isn't over. Instead of stopping, he did something incredible. He didn't pretend the wrong note hadn't happened. He didn't rush to cover it up. He accepted it. He played the wrong note again, softly, thoughtfully, and then he began to weave it back into the melody. He built the next few notes around that mistake, turning a moment of failure into a new, beautiful part of the song. That one broken note became a moment of pain, a moment of struggle, which then transformed back into a melody of love and acceptance. It was more powerful and more true than any perfect performance could ever be. When he played the final note, it was not a grand, loud finish. It was a soft, gentle release like a long, slow breath. He let his hands fall from the keys and rest in his lap. For a second, there was silence. The same heavy silence as before, and then the sound began. It didn't start as a loud, roaring applause. It started as a soft, rustling sound as people got to their feet. Then it grew, wave after wave, filling the entire hall. It was thunderous, heartfelt, and lasting. People were not just clapping. They were connecting with the raw, human story they had just witnessed. There were tears on many faces. They had not heard a perfect piece of music. They had heard a life. The janitor stood up, a little unsteady on his feet. He looked out at the standing crowd, the bright lights no longer blinding him. He saw their faces, not as a judging crowd, but as people who had understood. He gave a small, humble bow. He walked off the stage, the applause still washing over him. The director was there, smiling, ready to shake his hand, but the janitor just walked past him. The young student was there, his face wet with tears, a huge smile on his face. The janitor stopped and looked at him. He didn't say anything. He just placed a hand on the young man's shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. It was a gesture of thanks and of forgiveness. He didn't go to the party. He didn't talk to the reporters. He simply went to the custodial closet, took off the stiff suit jacket, and put on his familiar work coat. He picked up his mop and bucket. The applause had faded, and the hallways were quiet again. He walked down to the basement. He pushed open the door to the storage room. The old broken piano was still there under its cloth. He didn't uncover it. He didn't need to play it anymore. The music was no longer trapped in this room or in his grief. It was free. And so, for the first time in a very long time, was he. He had shared his heart with the world, and the world had given him back a piece of his own song.